think what happened is they designed this virus, they put it into the population, and they sat back waiting for the disease to manifest itself, and then they came in and then took over as experts, and of course they discovered the AIDS virus, which is why we were talking about how some of these AIDS, so-called top AIDS experts, are not MDs at all. They're veterinarians. They're people who have made a career with animal experimentation, producing diseases in animals. And now some of these people are top-flight AIDS experts with top-flight connections to genetic engineering companies and stock and government contracts and all of that. And of course, as far as I'm concerned, some of these people have got to have connections to the biological warfare establishment. But they're not going to tell you that because it's secret.
It's almost like saying, well, you know, if somebody created AIDS, why would they actually come out and say that?
Well, of course not. They're going to tell you gays did it because they do strange things to one another, and so do the Africans.
They're using certain communities as scapegoats for their own.
Well, of course. And I mean, I think that's why the response to AIDS, I think, has been so pitiful, is because in my jaded, negative, pessimistic view, in a genocide program, you want a lot of people to die. The idea is not to come in and save them. You know, so as far as I'm concerned, a lot of these AIDS science groups and these AIDS stuff is like sending blankets to the Jews in Auschwitz. You know, but they're not asking you, why are those people there? You know, why are the Jews there and the other people aren't? But, you know, these are very heavy questions that I would say most people do not want to deal with this kind of stuff.
Why doesn't...
They're in denial. Nobody wants to think that their government or any government could do something this awful to the people. But governments, as I say, do terrible things to people all the time. And people cooperate by helping them. It's like Yugoslavia. You know, how do you get one kind of white Christian group to go and kill another white Christian group, to both go kill a Muslim group? I mean, in present-day Europe, I mean, did we not learn anything? But, you know, people don't understand that if you don't like a group, it's real easy to get rid of them. It's real easy. We've all, I'm sure, you know, had that. Well, you know, we don't like this group or that group does this. And, you know, wouldn't it be nice if they just disappeared? I mean, I think that's part of all of us.
Wow. So the basic human nature is the driving force of this epidemic.
Well, I mean, I think so. I mean, you know, I never could quite understand why there is such reticence to talk about this stuff that we're talking about. But there is tremendous reticence. People just cannot deal with the idea of genocide.
Well, I think part of it might be they don't want to talk about AIDS because they're scared of, well, for one thing, they're believing the propaganda of the early 80s is a gay disease, and it can be sexually transmitted. That right there makes it, in a lot of people's minds, something that, you know, you can't really talk about. They don't want to touch. They don't want to bother with.
We talk about sex all the time on TV. I mean, you turn on your TV, we're constantly talking about sex.
But this is a negative light. This could kill you.
Well, but everybody knows that it could kill you. But what they don't know, and that's why I think it's important for people to understand the possibility that AIDS is man-made, because it has nothing to do with morality. I mean, what does, you know, if you have a man-made virus and you've seeded it into the population, what has that got to do with morality? What has that got to do with God? What has that got to do with right and wrong? Nothing. But yet we're still talking about, I mean, we have people running for president who are talking about how AIDS is, you know, God's retribution. I mean, that's like telling the Japanese that the atom bomb is God's retribution. You know, it's like telling the Jews the Nazis are, you know, your retribution. What does that mean?
Well, all this is listed, all these, well, your take on it is documented. I mean, there are literally hundreds of documents.
Well, no, because I've had doctors say, well, I think you're crazy because I went to the library and there's nothing in here about what you're saying. And what you're saying is totally ridiculous and it doesn't make any sense and you're paranoid or you're a communist or you're freaked out. or you've got HIV on your brain. I mean, I can show you medical reports saying, well, we have heard about AIDS as being biological warfare, but we have dismissed that because we have to talk about things that make sense. We can't talk about idiocy. I mean, this is written in medical journals. We can't talk about that because that is nonsense. Total nonsense. I mean, you can give them books and they'll go, well, no, it's monkeys. I mean, look in the microbiologic textbooks now, and they'll tell you that AIDS came from the green monkey. I mean, the propaganda has been so overwhelming that it has totally brainwashed, people's minds fully. That you write textbooks on microbiology, you talk about how the virus came from a monkey. And you can read in the LA Times, I can read you a report where certain scientists said it doesn't come from a monkey. It has nothing to do.
Is that feasible? I mean, can STLV3, that's what they call it, I suppose, be transferred through a monkey bite on a native? I mean,
well, how? I mean, and then how? All right, let's assume that it did. How come all right, so you got bitten by a monkey. And then within a year or two, you have millions of your comrades infected. How could that happen? I mean, even if you did get transferred from a monkey, you could not infect so many millions of people so quickly because somebody bit you on the ass.
I'd have to be an awfully busy guy.
You and your friends would have to be busy, too.
I know, it doesn't add up. The numbers just don't add up.
Of course not. I mean, what's the evidence that AIDS in America came from Africa? Because Gallo told you? I mean, how could that be? Or it's like the gays brought it from Haiti. I mean, I don't know any gay man that went to Haiti to get, to have sex. Do you? I mean, I don't think that's common. Although they have lots of brothels, they tell me, in Port-au-Prince, but I'm sure it's not just the gay men that are making love with those people. I'm sure there must be straight men and women and all kinds of Europeans. And I mean, they act like the only planes out of Africa came to the United States. I mean, there are people coming in and out of Africa all the time. So how come it didn't go any elsewhere?
Why didn't it show up?
I mean, I remember when AIDS started, and we were talking with some gay friends, and somebody was Asian and said, oh, well, I'll never get AIDS because AIDS does not affect Asians. Well, I mean, for a long time it didn't. Now we know that it affects Asians. Well, why didn't it affect Asians initially? It's a good question. Well, except that they didn't take Asians, in the experiment, to my knowledge.
Well, now, didn't southern Japan get...
That's another virus.
Oh,
That's another part of the virus family. And it's probably another experiment, And, of course, they're doing experiments in Asia, since the 40s, when the Japanese came in and did awful things to the Chinese.
So would you consider AIDS to be an STD, a sexually transmitted?
Well, I think there's no question that you can get it in bed. I don't know many virgins that have gotten AIDS.
Well,
I mean, is there any question in your mind as to whether it's a sexually transmitted disease? Obviously, you can get it through blood, but I'm just saying most people get AIDS in bed. And, of course, the government will tell you it's a hard virus to catch, which it is, but not in bed. In bed, if you're not careful, I think it's fairly easy to catch. And that's why AIDS at the present time is the #1 killer of young people in certain parts of America, like New York City. AIDS has been the leading killer not only of young men, but also of young women. And we're not talking lesbians here. We're talking, heterosexual women. Now they say, well, they could be dope addicts. Well, I'm not saying that they are or aren't. And obviously you can transfer this disease, through needles. There's no question about that. But if you're asking me, is it a sexually transmitted disease? Yes, it's sexually transmitted.
Now, is there a current figure on how many people in the United States or the world that are infected or that have AIDS?
Oh, I don't know. The figures vary. Somebody says 100 million people are going to be infected by the end of the century, 7 years away. Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, half my gay friends in my address book are now dead that were alive 10 years ago. Now, if that can happen to my address book, It can happen to everybody's address book eventually.
So there really isn't any, I'm just trying to figure out a positive.
Well, the positive, I mean, the other thing that I see positive out of this discussion is, I think if people, I mean, maybe I'm naive, but I think if people knew what was going on, I personally think that they would use more smarts to figure out how to live through this. But because the government is constantly talking about high-risk groups, you know, it's AIDS is, you know, anybody can get AIDS, but it's high-risk this, high-risk this. If you're doing unprotected sex in major cities or in small towns or whatever, you have to be careful. It has nothing to do with whether you're gay or straight or monogamous or polygamous or what have you. And nothing to do with your religion or God's will. It has only to do with there's a thing out there. It's like a landmine. It was put out there, and if you step on it, you're in trouble. But as I say, I still think that the unfortunate part is we're still talking about this as God's will. I mean, look at Buchanan, you know, at the Republican convention, talking about this is God's retribution to gays. Well, is it God's retribution to blacks in Africa? I mean, you know, we just tell people all this silly nonsense. You know, like, you know, and nowadays when people die, they're afraid to tell their family that they died of AIDS. Because it's like, oh, they died of AIDS, you know, well, you know, like there are politically correct diseases to die from and politically incorrect diseases to die from. I mean, if you die because you're part of an extermination program, I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of. Do you?
No. Is there, well, all this knowledge, if people start to accept it, start to become more aware of what may have occurred, do you think that will change the landscape in the sense that...
Well, I do. I think if people believed and understood that this disease was brought to you courtesy of the scientists, I think they might question those scientists a little bit. I mean, you know, my feeling is that these are the scientists that brought you this disease, and these are the ones you're paying to fix it. It's like asking the guy that dumped the atom bomb in Hiroshima to fix it. He's not going to fix it. I think telling people the truth about this disease will make them more aware in terms of not believing that they're going to be immune to this. If you keep thinking, well, if I don't have anal sex and I don't do drugs, you know, and I'm a Christian and I say my prayers, everything's going to be fine. I mean, I think you're kidding those people. It's like women who are faithful to their husband. You know, you can be faithful to your husband, but if your husband's catting around and has got HIV, you can die being faithful to your husband. They're not going to tell you that, but you know that that's true. You're better off being unfaithful with 20 people safely than faithful to one person unsafely.
So it's just really being smart about how you conduct your life.
You have to. Not only do you have to be smart with yourself, but you have to be clever in terms of the people that you choose to be sexual with. Now, that's asking a lot.
Well,
I mean, first of all, our knowledge of sex, you know, is sort of rudimentary, particularly in young people. And if you're saying, well, now look, you know, you have to do safe sex, the only time you cannot do safe sex is that if you go with your person that you love and you go and you get your blood tested, and if you're both negative, then you have to be safe, and you go back 6 months later and you get tested again, and if you're both negative, then you can go for it, but you have to promise to be loving and kind and true, because if you're not and one person strays, you have to come back and say, honey, you know, I messed up, and then, you know, they take the knife out or whatever. But the point is, you know, this is the kind of thing you have to do. Now, how many people are going to do that? I mean, most people can't even buy a condom. If you ask them to go through that, they go, wait, stop, I can't do this, I'm in love.
They don't want to objectively look at...
Well, you see, but you have to. You have to. You have to assume nowadays And I realize still in the heterosexual community, it's not a big deal compared to the gay community. But the idea is to not allow it to become a big deal in the heterosexual community. For God's sakes, heterosexuals should have learned something from all these gay deaths. But I think that if you educate people, they have to be smart in this regard. If you don't, you're very likely to pay with your life. And as you know, the government is not going to save your ass if you're HIV infected and you start going down the tubes. I mean, we watched how many hundreds of thousands of people die with this disease. There is no good treatment. We got stuff to keep you alive longer, but you're not going to be a happy camper while you're alive. And you're not going to be very sexy either. Stuff is like sending blankets to the Jews in Auschwitz. You know, but they're not asking you, why are those people there? You know, why are the Jews there and the other people aren't? But, you know, these are very heavy questions that I would say most people do not want to deal with this kind of stuff.
Why doesn't...
They're in denial. Nobody wants to think that their government or any government could do something this awful to the people. But governments, as I say, do terrible things to people all the time. And people co-opt.
Come out and say that.
Well, of course not. They're going to tell you gays did it because they do strange things to one another, and so do the Africans.
They're using certain communities as scapegoats for their own...
Well, of course. And, I mean, I think that's why the response to AIDS, I think, has been so pitiful, is because in my jaded, negative, pessimistic view, in a genocide program, you want a lot of people to die. The idea is not to come in and save them. You know, so as far as I'm concerned, a lot of these AIDS science groups and these AIDS operate by helping them. It's like Yugoslavia. You know, how do you get one kind of white Christian group to go and kill another white Christian group, to both go kill a Muslim group? I mean, in present-day Europe, I mean, did we not learn anything? But, you know, people don't understand that if you don't like a group, it's real easy to get rid of them. It's real as easy. We've all, I'm sure, you know, had that. Well, you know, we don't like. And I think what happened is they designed this virus, they put it into the population, and they sat back, waiting for the disease to manifest itself, and then they came in and then took over as experts, and of course they discovered the AIDS virus, which is why we were talking about how some of these AIDS, so-called top AIDS experts, are not MDs at all. They're veterinarians. They're people who have made a career with animal experimentation, producing diseases in animals. And now some of these people are top-flight AIDS experts with top-flight connections to genetic engineering companies and stock and government contracts and all of that. And of course, as far as I'm concerned, some of these people have got to have connections to the biological warfare establishment. But they're not going to tell you that because it's secret.
It's almost like saying, well, you know, if somebody created AIDS, why would they actually